Hi everyone. I should make up a little bit of time. I don't have very many slides. I'm presenting on 3 of ISPA's fibre-related projects, and I have fairly short bits of information on each of them to share. So these 3 things I'm chatting to you about are mostly projects of ISPA's fibre ISP working group. That is a working group that meets once a month. It spends a lot of time sharing war stories about problems with fibre network operators. That is a useful process. We take all the feedback from ISPs that are struggling with different aspects of different fibre network operators. We take that feedback and we have meetings with the fibre network operators to tell them these are problems that we think you have and how you engage with your ISPs. If you fix them, they will like you more. But when the fibre ISP working group is not sharing those war stories, it does a few other things. I'm going to chat to you about 3 of them: the fibre network operator perception survey, our mapping projects, and then the last slide, just one quick look at our best practice recommendations. So first of all, we do a F&O perception survey. Every 6 months, we've run it for, this is the 5th time we've done it, but in a slightly different format. So we have accurate, comparable data for 2 years now, 4 different surveys. And what we do is we ask ISPA members specifically to rate F&Os on 11 different metrics, from technical competence to staff friendliness to the systems in place to interact with the F&O and give us those scores. The survey is anonymous and we try and be inclusive. If an F&O wants to be listed so that it can be rated, we will add them to the list. We are tracking 39 F&Os. They don't need to be open access, but there are 39 F&Os we're aware of that allow ISPs to sell some of their services. We do publish the full results on the website. The February 2025 results are not out yet. They will be out probably tomorrow or early next week. And this is just to give you an idea of how many ISPs participate and how many F&Os they rank. The latest survey we had 46. It's hovered between 44 and 50 ISPs. That's a reasonable number of ISPs to do the ratings. And we've seen that they increasingly rate more of the F&Os. So in the last survey, the ISPs rated an average of almost 8 F&Os. That means we think ISPs are tending to onboard themselves with more and more of the F&Os that they can find so that they have a wider variety of areas they can cover. So what were the results for the February survey? Well, we saw Octatel, who were first in August last year. Not only did they keep their first spot, but they were the most improved as well, going up 0.3 from 7.1 to a really good average score of 7.4 on the ratings. That is excellent. Hats off to Octatel for staying on top and improving the gap between them and the next F&O. The next 4, the order shuffled a little bit. Liquid was in the 2nd place before, but now we have 2 ties at 6.7, Metro Fibre and OpenServe, and tied for 4th place, Liquid Africa and Liquid Intelligent Technologies. That should be technologies, not networks. But we'll see there's actually been improvement. Liquid dropped by 0.6, but they've done really well to come up from a 4.7 2 years ago to quite a climb in August last year to 6.7, back down to 6.1. 6 is the average, so those 5 networks are all doing better than average for the top 8 networks. The top 8 networks are the 8 networks that get the most ratings from ISPs. So all of these had between 17 and 42 different ISPs rate them. We think that's enough to get a reasonable measure of what ISPs think of them without one person being able to manipulate the results too much. So pretty good showings for all those top 5. We're seeing Frogfoot actually improved slightly, but it's still sitting at 5.6, just below the average. DFA, regrettably, have not been able to look at the slide that started at 5.8 and has gone gradually downhill over the last 2 years, now sitting at 4.9. And Vuma sitting, unfortunately, near the bottom of that list on a 4.6, also has tended to slide down over the last 2 years. Those are the scores. Let's have a look at some individual operator profiles. So we do release a detailed report of this. It'll be on the web next week. And one of the things we've done in the last couple is look at how each individual operator scored over time. So you see these little graphs. Those are the 11 metrics. value, reliability, support, technical competence, communications, staff friendliness, business processes, software systems, open access, optimism, and how likely you are as an ISP to recommend this operator to somebody else. These are all the graphs. You see some interesting things. OpenServe is the only one that the graph actually puts 10 on the axis. That is because OpenServe's reliability consistently gets 8 or more on a rating. It is one of the few networks that is consistently viewed by everyone as reliable, even if there are some other problems. Reliability gets a reliability plus on that score. Octatel scores very well on software, also reliability and great communications. Not many of the FNOs score highly on communications. That's generally one that gets marked down. Octatel doing very well there. Metro Fibre score really well across the board, a little bit down on their perception of how well they adhere to open access. Metro Fibre, you might want to look at how you name your own ISP because people get confused if it has the same name as you do. Liquid, we've seen specific comments. Their reliability is good, their technicality is good, and support pretty good. One of the comments you'll see later on is that Liquid has the ability to make their customers feel like partners rather than just customers. Then looking at the 4 a little bit further down the chart, Link Africa always do really well on open access, as do DFA. Both of those two, consistently ISPs say, we think they treat all ISPs fairly, we really like the model they have. That's something other fiber network operators could learn from. Frogfoot and Vumatel. Frogfoot get pretty good marks for staff and staff friendliness and technical competence. Vumatel reasonably okay on reliability and technical competence, but still a little bit of a struggle down there. You can see how both DFA and Vumatel just seem to manage to slide over the course of the time we've been doing these surveys. Then I thought it might be interesting for this survey to have a look at some of the other networks. So these are not the top 8. They're networks that got more than a dozen ratings, but less than the 17 odd that the others did. So here we have another 8. And importantly, the top 3 on that's Lightspeed, Lightstruck, and Open Fibre, would be 2nd, 3rd, and 4th if we combine these 2 charts. So those are very good ratings for them. Lightspeed, Open Fibre, and Lightspeed, Lightstruck, and Evotel have consistently done quite well on the scores. And the other 3 in the top 5, Open Fibre, ThinkSpeed, and Lightstruck, have doing very well on scores. They're above the 6.0 average that the top 8 have. And you can see some really impressive change from Open Fibre, scored 1.5 on their average. Only had 2 people rating them, which is why it was so low. Someone really didn't like them. But now they've gotten a lot more ratings. We're seeing them score 6.8, which is pretty good. So if you are an ISP looking at some additional networks you want to connect to, this gives you some measure of the pain that other ISPs are having. The biggest slider on this chart was Zoom Fibre, who went from sitting in 7.2 and 7.4 in 2023, 2024, down to 4.8, the biggest slider in all of the top 16 rated networks. Each time we do this survey, we have a bonus question. This time around, we asked the question, what does this FNO do that is better than other FNOs and you want other FNOs to learn from? And we got a whole bunch of positive things. We don't often get a lot of positive things in the survey. People like to moan. I thought some of these were great. I really like the second one. Connectivity services has very neat patching. Now, if you're OCD like me, that would be a real motivating factor to do business with that company. I like a company that does neat patching. It says a lot about their general attitude that they managed to get that right. Have a look at this. It will be in the full report. If you represent one of those networks, have a look at some of the nice things that people had to say about you. Let's move on to our second project, which was Open Access Mapping Project. Our goal with this was to try and get some idea, some visual idea of how much competition there is in the fiber market. We wanted this so that we could have substantiated numbers to go to the competition authorities. In competition law, it's very important to be able to prove that someone is a dominant operator. It's quite hard to do something anti-competitive if you're not classed as a dominant operator in the market. If there's enough competition, it's very hard to do something anti-competitively. We also wanted to look at gaps or trends in areas where there was lacking in coverage for some reason. Some lessons for the mapping project. Mapping is hard. We discovered that operators are not consistent in how they provide maps. Their map of a suburb might look like that. Their competitors will look like that, and they will not overlap accurately. Operators are not good at maintaining their own maps. I think anybody that deals with them knows that. And most importantly for our purposes, a network map is not necessarily and not usually a map of where you can get services. A map of the network has big bits of the network that just connect one bit of the network to another, and you cannot get services over that. And that plays havoc with any attempt to map things. So last year we did phase 1, and we got maps that looked like this. We published it actually we released this, Stanford did a presentation at Zanog last year. And this map has very little white mapping space, which is one operator only. You'll see most of this is a slightly darker yellow, which means there's 2 operators. And the whole area of outer Gauteng has got at least 2 operators. That's because we map this based on subspaces as defined by Stats SA. And the further you get away from population centers, the bigger the subspaces are. And in our mapping project, if a network went through that subspace, which could be an enormous, it's not a suburb, an enormous area of land, we would count that as having an operator. So consequently, the amount of operators was overcounted because you could clip the border of a large subspace and you would still be counted. All we could conclude from phase 1 last year is that at most 35% of consumers had a choice of open access networks. That is the most consumers. Probably it's about twice that, but we couldn't conclude that from our mapping data. So for phase 2, we tried something a little bit different. We haven't published this formally yet, but you're seeing some of the maps from this. We split the whole country into quarter-kilometer grids, so 250 meters by 250 meters. Split the whole country up. We used 24 open access maps. That's quite a lot of them. There's probably more than you thought there were out there who claimed to be open access of some manner. And we only colored the individual 250 by 250 meter square if the network map went over that area. We still think this overcounts. And all we could conclude from this definitively was that at least 38% of areas where there is some fiber, there is no competition. There's only one. Again, it's probably a little bit higher than that. But we do see some a little bit more accurate things in the maps. Let's have a look at Gauteng. In fact, we've just got Johannesburg, so the west part of Gauteng and Cape Town. We're seeing a lot more red on this map than we did on the previous ones. Red is where on those 24 network maps, in that little block of 250 by 250 meters, there was only one operator. You can still see, though, if you look down the roads, where in Cape Town it's largely blue and green, that indicates there are 8 or 9 networks whose map goes over that road. But you definitely can't get access from all of them. So where the roads go, where the ducts are, that's why we're seeing that discoloration in ways that is not completely accurate. But we think this is probably a better picture than we've had previously of the state of competition with the fiber networks. And we have these maps for the 8 major metros in the country. Then the final slide is just a note. I did present on this at last year's Zanog, but just a reminder that we have published some best practice recommendations primarily for FNOs, but also with ISPs. Our goal with that is to try and make sure that consumers of these services get a consistent, fair, and reasonable approach in the market. And the best practice recommendations do cover quite a lot. They cover what you should be before you claim you're an open access network, whose responsibility is to handle customer data. This is a pet peeve for many ISPs. Most ISPs do not want FNOs talking to their customers. The customers belong to the ISPs, who pays the money or doesn't pay the money. And if the customer doesn't pay, it's the ISP that suffers first. So who should be handling the customer data and communications? The relationships between FNOs and ISPs, notice periods for price changes. FNOs generally don't give enough notice or do it at 5 p.m. on a Friday at the end of the month, which is not pleasant. Similarly, line cancellation and migration processes are covered there. We have a current focus looking at ways we can help FNOs and ISPs deal with ISP hoppers. These are customers who will sign up with one ISP and then just not pay and hop to another ISP and another ISP, often on the same fibre network operator. We have repeated requests to ISPA saying, please could you provide a database of bad non-paying customers that we can all refuse to provide service to. Now that's legally very difficult for us to do, but what we have pointed out in the best practice recommendations, and we've stressed several times since then to the FNOs, there is nothing stopping you as an FNO from including in the information you give to ISPs, looking up an address, how many times that address has previously changed the ISP link to it. And that is useful information for an ISP. It's not customer-specific information. So if I'm looking to provide services to a customer that is on one long road, and if I look at that FNO's database and the FNO's kind enough to say that address has changed ISPs 5 times in the last year, you know that's probably a landlord renting a service to a tenant who keeps changing quickly, or it's a customer that's just not paying and keeps jumping to the next ISP without paying. Either way, if you know that the count of how many times the line has changed at a particular premises is 4 or 5, then you can take steps to make sure that your engagement with your customer, your contract with the customer, makes it a little harder for them to disappear without paying you money they may owe you. That's it. I have only a few slides, and we are done. Happy to take questions on any of those FNO projects.
Hello, Graham from the internet. On the mapping projects, I mean, I'm glad to see that there's been some refinements to make the data feel a little bit closer to what we sort of intuitively understand of the market. Has there been any distinction between the business-focused fibre operators who technically do a lot of actually just backhaul and not actually end-user services versus the fibre-to-the-home operators in that, or is that overlaying all of that in one map?
No, there's no distinction. We use the maps that the FNOs published of their networks. That's a good question, though. Now, we've had pressure in the survey to split out business services and home services because, for example, to pick on OpenSurf, they did well, so I don't feel too bad picking on them. We generally, in most parts of the country, get very good feedback on their fibre to the home services, less good feedback on their fibre to the business services. And people wanted to be able to rank them highly for one and poorly on the other. The problem is there is no definition of what fibre to the home and fibre to the business is. There is none, not in legislation. If you speak to different operators, what someone's business service is very different from what someone else's business service. So if there's no acceptable definition of what is business and what is home, it's very difficult to split up a network or even a question on a survey. So we haven't tried to do that at all. I'm not sure we're going to do a phase 3 of the fibre service because we have national government, the National Planning Commission, the Digital Economy Master Plan. All of those are looking at mapping services. They have a lot more, they're able to put a lot more pressure on network operators to give them useful map data. So we might see coming from government some maps that actually show where you can get access. What we might do, because it's interesting to see how rapidly this changes, is to use the last mapping we've done with historical data. So we might be able to go back 5-10 years and look at how rapidly did the colour change in Cape Town and Gauteng, because that's going to give us some idea of how much we might see it changing into the future. So that's probably the next step we'll do. I don't think we're going to try and get more accurate data because I'm not sure it even exists that we could request from the networks without some stick.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a very good point. I mean, it's easy to say what is obviously a home service and what's obviously a business service, but there's a lot of grey in the middle that would be difficult to actually categorize. So,
and every person working from home and running their own business thinks that they have a business service when they're paying for a home service.
Hendrik from the internet, Hendrik Versager from the internet. With regards to the ISP hoppers, the non-paying ones, have there been any thoughts of registering them with a credit bureaus or those sort of things as not being paying?
Yes, we have some ISPA members who do that because sometimes we deal with complaints from members of the public that they've been unfairly listed, and we've had to actually mediate some of those matters. The impression I have from discussing this with our members is that you can do it. You can, as a company, decide every time you have a non-paying customer, you're going to go through the effort of registering with a credit company. But on the balance, most ISPs seem to think it's not worth the hassle to do that. The costs and admin for doing that seem to be enough that most ISPs will just not bother and take the hit. Ed.
Hi there, Ed from the internet. So just a random thought out of the box that popped into my mind now, something I thought about some time ago, but one of the problems with a lot of the mapping for fiber network operators is it's a mess and no one, as you said, everyone's got a different format. To perhaps make things easier for people to want to put their data in there, there's many operators who often need to find a fiber between point A and point B. And there's no easy way to figure out what you can actually buy through there. But many people have fiber that's often unused. If ISPA could make a tool or find a tool, or at least facilitate a tool, that'll help people to say, here we have routes available that people can do fiber exchanges on, or do commercial deals on, but like just make a centralized mapping solution for people. I think that might A, help you get better details for projects like this, but B, be quite a useful service to members. I saw someone actually, I forgot about it until I thought about this right now, someone in Europe doing the same thing because people have to get from point A to point B, and the only people who have fiber the whole way is usually the big telcos who charge abusive rates. But often there's smaller guys who will have an affordable rate or be able to do just a handshake deal to say, like, if you give me 10 kilometers, I'll give you 10 kilometers. And they seem to have been doing exchanges like that quite effectively, and that's helped the smaller ISPs quite a lot. So it might be a fun project to try, a big one, but a fun one.
I think that would be a good project. I'm not sure that ISPA is the right entity to do it. It's the sort of thing you would like to see ICASA doing. You know, ICASA is supposed to be supporting the networks, their licensees. They should be coordinating. In fact, they have an obligation to collect those maps, and they haven't been doing it. Oddly enough, we got a fairly sweet letter from ICASA about 3 months ago. They were aware of all of our mapping project and said, could we please hand over all of the results of our mapping project to them? It would be really useful if they could have that. And we had to say, look, we don't actually have any of the maps. We got them from the networks. We used a third-party entity to provide these maps. We have no data to hand over to you. Terribly sorry, you should have been collecting it all along. Also, the operators themselves are quite resistant to giving more accurate mapping data. They view it as a highly competitive thing. Generally, what they're putting out there in the market is not 100% up to date. It's usually got a bit of a time lag. They don't want people to know where they're going to deploy soon. So that's also an issue. You're up against vested interests in not making that information too available. Okay, we have no more questions. That is good, because then I can be finished and we can move on to the last slot, which unfortunately you have me for again for a little bit. So we get the next presentation up, please. So the last slot for today is a open session without much presenting at all on a roadmap to restoring Afrinic. Now, we put this was almost the first topic on the agenda for this event way back in